Ladies and gentlemen, good day. Welcome to another in our series of Conversations with Colette.
This morning I'm introducing Professor Anthony Clayton. Professor Anthony Clayton is the Alpine Professor of Caribbean Sustainable Development at the University of the West Indies. He is also a visiting professor at the Center for Environmental Strategy in the School of Engineering at the University of Surrey. He's visiting professor at the Institute for Sustainable Development, the Institute for Studies of Science, Technology and Innovation in the School of Social and Political Studies at the University of Edinburgh. He's adjunct Distinguished Professor of Sustainable Development in the Faculty of Business and Management, University of Technology, affiliated scholar at the Jack Gordon Institute for Public Policy within Stephen Green School of International and Public Affairs at Florida International University. He's a fellow at the Caribbean Academy of Sciences, fellow of the World Academy of Sciences, where he serves as chairman of the Membership Advisory Committee for Social and Economic Sciences, and he was the first person to be appointed a distinguished fellow of the Caribbean Association of Eastern European Trained Professionals. In 2015, Professor Clayton was awarded Jamaica's Order of Distinction in the rank of Commander Class. Professor Clayton has also served as a member of the government of Jamaica's Climate Change Advisory Board, a member of the government of Jamaica's Rule of Law Committee, deputy chairman of the Jamaica Constabulary Force Operational Reform Oversight Committee, chairman of the Broadcasting Commission, and other areas. Professor Clayton's research is based on policy analysis, future studies, and scenario and strategic planning. His main research areas include national and citizens' security, energy security, urban development, environmental management, and development planning. He has over 30 years of international experience in policy development and has worked in Europe, Latin America and the Caribbean, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Southeast Asia. Professor Clayton has undertaken many policy studies on a wide range of development issues for a large number of governments in a range of intergovernmental agencies, including UNEP, UNIDO, DFID, the World Bank, the Commonwealth Secretariat, and the Organization of American States. Ladies and gentlemen, it is our pleasure today to introduce to you Professor Anthony Clayton. Good afternoon, Professor Clayton. Welcome to Conversations with Colette.
Good afternoon, Colette. It's very good to see you again.
Thank you, sir. We have introduced a YouTube channel, Conversations with Colette, which is intended to empower, educate, motivate, and inspire. We have outlined the conversations in a form of themes to guide each series. The first series that just ended was dedicated to transformational leadership, for which we conducted 5 interviews. This new series of conversations or interviews is being conducted under the theme, The Road to Good Governance and Fiscal Discipline. Professor Clayton, as you're aware, adherence to the rule of law is a key characteristic of good governance. The World Bank 2011 has unequivocally established that crime in Jamaica was most destructive to the economic and the social structure, as it robs the country of potential to grow, creates instability, retards human capital, propels migration of the most skilled workers, and discourages investments. In 2013, they also emphasized that there was a potential for increasing per capita incomes by a 400% governance dividend and reduction in child mortality by 75% simply by curtailing crime and corruption. I am aware of the extensive work that you have done, Professor Clayton, in this area, and would love for you to share your wisdom with members of the public, each of whom, along with national leaders, can do something in their own small way about Jamaica's seemingly intractable crime problem. Based on the World Bank's informed position stated above, if this problem is not brought under control, Jamaica could be faced with an even greater economic, social, and health crisis through undue pressures on the emergency services in the midst of a pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated our economic woes, coupled with this problem of crime and corruption. We are therefore asking Professor Clayton to tap into your expertise to share with us under the theme Fore-sighting and Strategizing to Control Crime and Corruption in Jamaica. In segment 1, we're going to ask you, Professor Clayton, to provide us with a little bit about the work that you have done and still do in sustainable development, with a general focus on governance and policy implementation.
Well, Colette, thank you for that. Would you like me to talk a little bit about the crime and corruption issue first?
Yes.
Okay. When we are trying to estimate the cost of crime and corruption to this country, that includes a number of things, some of which are direct costs, but then there are also indirect costs. So the direct costs include things like the cost of a life lost, the cost of healthcare for people who have been injured, the cost of security services, the cost of private security, the cost of having to put in bars around our windows and security cameras outside of our houses, and all of the other measures that we have to take to keep ourselves safe, or trying to keep ourselves and our families safe in a society with a high level of violence. But this is only part of the picture. There's indirect costs, many of which are effectively hidden. This is the cost of the investment that doesn't come to Jamaica because high levels of crime and corruption are a significant deterrent. It's the loss of human capital, scarce human capital. Many of our university graduates go abroad. And of course, there are both pull and push factors. The pull factors are the fact that there are more opportunities. They don't have the same restrictions to their development. They can earn more money and so forth. But there are push factors too. And a lot of people cite the fact that they don't feel safe in this country. And that's one of the factors that's a major deterrent and a major driver for the migration of human capital. There's also a deterrent to domestic saving. There's a lot of people, for example, who will not want to reinvest in their businesses. They don't want people to know that they are becoming rich, because then they become a target for extortion and robbery. So you have to take all of these factors into account when you're working out the total cost of crime and corruption. And when we talk about corruption, a lot of people think mainly in terms of low-level corruption. But there's a form of corruption in this country which very rarely gets penalized, and that's the high-level corruption. This is where we see, for example, and I know you're aware of this, where government contracts go to the highest cost bidder because that person has agreed to kick back to the politician concerned, or where we see money, investment decisions being made or contract decisions being made to people who have not been evaluated, who don't pass any kind of fit and proper test. In some cases, we've also seen public money going to people without even a contract in place. Now, the extent of this is quite horrifying, and we're all aware of recent scandals at Petrojan and PCJ, but I am aware of even larger frauds happening within the government. I don't think this is about which party is in power. I think there are major problems of corruption in both parties. I do want to say that, I have great respect for many of the people in public life who are honest and trying to do an honest job, but there are serious criminals in both parties. And until each party takes this seriously and agrees to purge the corrupt from their ranks, then this problem is going to persist. Now, when you add up all of these costs, you're probably looking at something like 7% of our GDP. And then you have to think what that is actually cost us. And again, I know that you're familiar with the background to this, but this problem really started back in the early 70s when our politics started to become polarized and violent, and both parties were involved in arming their respective factions. And this is where the level of violence in this country started to accelerate dramatically. At the time of independence, our level of violence was pretty close to world average. And now we're third or fourth in the world in terms of violence. Well, that didn't come from nowhere. That actually has its roots in the fact that our political parties were both involved in the polarization of politics. Both were involved in arming their factions. And we helped to create the gang structures which have plagued us ever since, and we have never yet managed to get rid of them. So if we take this rate of loss back to the early 70s, then what you actually will then see if you run the numbers is that today this economy would be somewhere from 3 to 10 times bigger than it is now if we hadn't tolerated this rate of loss. Because the other thing that the violence did is it moved Jamaica from that day to this, from a high growth path onto a low growth path. Throughout the 50s and 60s, Jamaica's economy was growing to about 4.5% per annum. Since the early 1970s, we've been growing on average less than 1% per annum. Now, we did a side-by-side comparison of Singapore and Jamaica. And until early 1970s, Jamaica was a larger economy and growing faster, or about the same rate as Singapore. The difference is they didn't stop growing. They just continued on that trajectory. And Jamaica fell from a very high growth path to a very low growth path. The difference today is that Singapore is now 10 times richer than we are per person. And what that gives you, I think, is the first real indication of what crime and corruption has actually cost this country. Arguably, it's cost us 9/10 of our national wealth. So all of the problems that we see today with poverty and inadequate infrastructure, crumbling roads, ill-equipped hospitals, are all part of the total cost of crime and corruption to this country. It's not until we find the strength to actually deal with this problem once and for all that we will ever get past this and get back onto a high growth path and actually make this society the kind of stable and prosperous country that it should have been.
Yes, indeed. Thank you so very much, Professor Clayton. This takes us nicely into segment 2, your antecedent. Sir, we are also aware that your knowledge and expertise has been sought by government agencies, political leaders, and organizations locally and internationally to guide strategic planning and initiatives relating to crime and sustainable economic development. Would you care to share some of the areas in which you have worked and conducted research, as well as provided guidance?
Okay, it's quite a long list. I've worked on development planning using future-oriented strategic planning techniques like Fore-sighting and technology road mapping. I've done a lot on things like urban development and planning. We are in the final stages of writing the project which we did for the government on Jamaica's next city, which involved thinking about what a city would look like and how it would function in 2050 and 2100. And over the years, I've also been involved in projects on water management, waste management, done a lot of work on energy security, some on food and water security. And of course, we've done a lot of work and continue to do a lot of work on national security, mainly because national security and failing to achieve national security is probably the single biggest impediment to this country's development. I also do a lot of work on things like environmental impacts, environmental management, climate change, and the planning process itself. I was asked by the government a few years ago to do a review of our legislation, planning and regulatory systems, and I was able to identify a number of weaknesses in the way we do things now, and suggested, or was able to suggest a number of potential improvements, most of which I have to say have not been implemented. But that's thing is, you can do the assessment, do the study, but then it's the politicians that have to make the decision, and they make those decisions sometimes on perfectly respectable grounds. For example, they have to prioritise which legislative changes they want to put through, and in some areas, as you know, we've seen legislation take many years to grind through Parliament. With the National Identification Scheme, I think this was first came under discussion 30 years ago. So it's taken a long time to get to this point. In other cases, it's because there are politicians who, for whatever reasons, sometimes women, do not want to see particular reforms go through, because their personal interests are favoured by the status quo. And on several occasions, I have, I believe, seen legislative reforms being sabotaged by people who were members of Parliament, but who also had outside business interests, which they were not going to see compromised by legislation that would have benefited the whole country. So we do have to think about the integrity of our political system, the integrity of our decision-making processes. Otherwise, we can only make progress by persevering, by persuading people, by making people aware of the challenges that this country faces and what we need to do about it, which is exactly, of course, what you're trying to do with this YouTube show.
Thank you so very much, Prof. So it appears to me that the major problem we're having is not the lack of information or studies, but lack of implementation of the policies that can make the difference to take this country forward.
Well, many people have said this. However, it is also true. We probably do far too many studies. We certainly, most of our problems have been thoroughly studied. We've got pretty clear recommendations. We do know what to do. We do have problems with implementation. And it's partly that our machinery of government is actually surprisingly weak. A lot of our institutions are quite weak. We have a civil service culture that is risk averse and not inclined to take the steps necessary for a change in policy. We have really an inappropriate growth of the role of the minister. Ministers have actually, over the years, we've given too much power to ministers, and we've disempowered the actual machinery of government, the civil service, who do need to be making operational decisions. The minister's job is really to focus on long-term strategy. We really need to empower civil servants to make a lot of operational decisions in a totally apolitical and technical manner. But we've tended not to do that. So a lot of decisions basically get stuck on the minister's desk, awaiting a decision, and that's where they're running. We have been, if I may give you an example, we have been looking at the changes that we need in our electronic media and communication systems. Our current legislation, our current systems of regulation are woefully out of date. They were written for a bygone age, and they are no longer fit for purpose. And we have been asking the government to simply make a number of small changes in our legislation which will enable us to deal with the industry as it is now, as opposed to as it was way back in the day. We've been asking for this since 2009, and there has never been sufficient bandwidth to get these proposals through government. So, and this is not an isolated example. There are many cases like this where we really need to modernize, we really need to bring our systems up to date. But the ability of Parliament to process things in a timely manner is extraordinarily weak. Yes. So, we really need to do this. And part of this is about getting politicians to focus more on the business management of the country and less on the politics.
Yes.
And partly it's about empowering and it's building up the strength in the actual effective part of government, the machinery of government, civil service, to drive a lot of this forward and actually ensure that the proposals are properly drafted and come to Parliament in a properly scheduled manner. So until we fix these problems, I'm afraid we will always be relegated to the slow lane, and we will see other countries continue to outpace it.
Yes.
Quality of governance is also a very important determinant of rates of national development. If you compare with Singapore, the government of Singapore is a remarkably cheap government to run. It only takes about 15% of GDP.
Yes.
Compared with, for example, France, which takes about 45 or close over 45% of GDP. Because Singapore has gone for a very different model of government. They want a small civil service, very highly qualified, very able, and highly paid. So instead of going for this model of putting everybody, all your friends on the public payroll, creating a bloated public payroll, which is then very ineffective, you have a small number of very highly regarded, competent, effective, well-paid decision makers. And then a lot of the actual machinery of government can now be automated. And we've seen this in countries like Latvia, Lithuania, Georgia, and so forth. Because when they came out of the old Soviet system, their systems of government were so dysfunctional and so broken that they realized they were past reform. They had to scrap them and completely rebuild them. And of course, they went for next generation government systems. So every aspect of government is online. Every aspect. You don't ever have to go into a government office anymore. You never have to stand in tax returns, permits, licenses, approvals, passports, driving licenses. Everything is now online transaction. It means that the cost of government has diminished dramatically because you no longer need nearly as many government offices and nearly as many people on the payroll. Everything now is an automated system. So then you only need a few high-level, top-level civil servants making key operational decisions, and the rest can be automated. If we could do something like that here, we could greatly reduce the cost of government, which means that the government would then reduce our taxes, and we would have instantaneous government. No more standing in line, decisions being made immediately. And this is something which would benefit everybody in this country enormously, apart from, of course, the corrupt. Because corrupt people benefit from an inefficient government. You cannot get your application through the government system. Of course, there is the pressure to go and you talk to them and somebody says, well, for a certain amount of money, I will make sure that your thing goes through. And there was stories in the paper just yesterday about one of the tax offices where the people on the tax in the tax office are running this little scam whereby you either stand in line or you pay some money and you go to the head of the line and you get your transaction through. There's a lot of that. So you have people in the system working for the system who don't want to see the reform.
Yes.
Because that would take away their opportunity to make some money on the side. Again, we have to get past this. We have to make the reforms because the whole country will benefit. In theory, in principle, we know how to solve crime and corruption. We know how to reform government. We know how to run an efficient planning system.
Yes.
If we could just put these reforms through,
yes.
you would see a renaissance in this country. When Colombia dealt with its problems with organized crime from 2002 to 2008, at the end of just 6 years, that economic growth rate had gone up nearly 400%.
Yes.
Just by removing the impediments to development and growth. That, I believe,
which is consistent with what the World Bank said about that governance dividend.
Absolutely. No, we've seen it in real life. We have actually seen countries do this.
Yes.
They solve their problems of crime and corruption and inefficiency, and the economy just takes off. Now, if we could only do that in this country,
yes,
we would all be so much better off, apart from the corrupt, who like to keep things the way they are.
Yes. What we really need is that commitment at the highest level.
Well, we may have that now, in theory. I served on the National Crime Consensus Committee, and we wrote a number of recommendations for dealing with crime and corruption in this country. And that was signed by both the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition.
Lovely.
So, in principle, both of our two main parties are now committed to the necessary reforms.
Yes.
Of course, signing the document is one thing, implementing is another.
That's right.
So we will have to wait and see.
Thank you so much, Prof.
Yeah,
We
there
look
is
forward-
that's up
We
to
look forward to the implementation.
implementation again. There is a committee which is going to monitor the progress with the crime consensus, and I hope that where necessary, they will tell the country, even when the government falls down in any of these communities.
Thank you so much, Prof. That has set the foundation for our next question. We're really looking at a real crime reduction strategy. For more than 3 years, the government of Jamaica has been utilizing various permutations of states of emergency, zones of special operations, and other short-term strategies to tame Jamaica's crime monster. Still, the problem has worsened in some areas, even as the security forces appear to be improving their crime-fighting capabilities, particularly through the use of technology. Prof, what, in your opinion, can a government in a country like Jamaica do to reduce the need for ZOSAs and SOEs while effectively reducing crime and corruption to more manageable levels?
I don't believe we can do without ZOSAs. We could do without SOEs. The difference is that under state of emergency, certain laws are effectively suspended. The ZOSOs, however, give us most of the benefits of SOEs without those additional, while still retaining the current legal safeguards. So I do believe that we should not try to use SOEs unless absolutely imperative. But I think that many communities have to be normalized and reintegrated back into normal society. And given the fact that we have some gangs very deeply entrenched in these communities, I think a period of ZOSO operation is probably the only solution. I've seen this work very successfully in other countries. The one I studied in particular is the favela normalization program, the pacifying police program, they call it, in the state of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, where you had these favelas, these ghetto communities, very high crime, homicide rate probably 80 plus per 100,000. And then what would happen is the paramilitary police and the army would go in overwhelming force, not to have a shootout with the bad guys, but to ensure that the bad guys moved out of the area, which they would do. The army would actually tell them, they would give them a week's notice that they were coming in. Because the point was not to fight them, but it was to dislodge them, to get them out of those communities. Then they would go through house to house, searching for weapons and narcotics, make sure that none of these things were left in the communities. That process, beginning to end, would take about 3 months. After that, they would hand over to the specially trained pacifying police, who would do what we now call community-centered policing. And they would do, I've seen incredible things. I've seen police stations which were also crash facilities. They were providing after-school care for children. They had libraries in the police stations for children. They organized Christmas parties. They had presents for children. Many of the children in the ghetto, they had never had a present before in their lives. The police were organizing this for them. In Brazil, it's a very, very big thing for a girl to have a coming out ball when she's like 14, 15. And most of the girls in the ghetto, they never had this. So the police organized that for them as well. So you've got, and they're real cops. I mean, they're real cops. Don't ever get that wrong. They're armed police officers, and they will confront bad guys if they had to. But they did all of this other wonderful stuff, which was really getting to know the community and raising a whole generation of children who regarded the police, who actually understood that the police were there to protect them, that the police were their friends. Now, that's not a program that can happen in 90 days. That's a generational shift. And when the pacifying police went into these communities, they said, if it takes 25 years, we're here for 25 years.
Wonderful.
You never make the mistake of signaling to the bad guys when you're going to go, because they're not, all they have to do is wait for you. So it has to be an indefinite, open-ended commitment. And then over time, you raise a new generation of people who actually have a very different culture, very different attitude. And what it has done to those favelas is astonishing. The favela that I made a particular study of, before the program, there was not one single legitimate business in that favela. And now they've got crash facilities, they've got churches, they've got supermarkets, they've got stores, they've got dance schools, they've got a souvenir shop, lots of restaurants and good restaurants too. So you've got all of these businesses now burgeoning because this community, the creativity has been so crushed and suppressed in this community for so long. When you take away the burden and the fear of crime and corruption and violence and political violence, then people actually can start to live as they were supposed to live. I've seen it happen. I would love to see that happen in this country.
Yes. And finally, to get a chance to self-actualize, to realize their true potential and bring out that entrepreneurial spirit.
They do. You just have to get the bad guys out of their lives.
Yes.
And I don't just mean the street level bad guys, I mean including the high level bad guys.
Yes.
If you can actually dislodge the gangs, and eventually, of course, we want to dismantle the gangs, decommission them. But you also have to take out their top cover, their political protectors. If we can do that, we can actually break the deadly grip that crime and corruption has had on this country for decades. And then you'll see people living in peace and freedom and prosperity.
Thank you so much, Rob. I so appreciate this. It gives me hope. It gives me hope for our country. It gives me hope for our region. Wonderful.
You know, Colette, it's something that the difference between heaven and hell is only one step in either direction.
Yes.
Oh, yes, although our situation, we've got one of the highest homicide rates in the world, we've got stuck with low growth for many, many decades, all of the attendant problems of poverty, all of that can be fixed. If we just fix the core problems, you would see this country have a renaissance with a flowering of human spirit and prosperity and growth. That's to be well worth working.
Wonderful. This takes us nicely into our final question, Prof. Thank you so much for what you're sharing. We're looking at foresighting as a tool for effectively tackling the crime problem. Professor Clayton, some time ago, in his final parliamentary speech, the late Prime Minister, the Honorable Edward Philip George Seaga, mentioned and cited your work on foresighting. He recommended that those responsible for crafting strategy, government strategy and policies in particular, should explore the use of foresighting based on how accurately you had used it to predict global and local trends, particularly relating to sustainable development and the economic fallout that we have witnessed from certain preferential arrangements that were in place. How can foresighting be used in crime fighting, particularly focusing on hotspots, social decay, proceeds of crime, confiscation and use of assets, and provision of resources for our security forces? I have a final question that I want to ask you after that. I realize there's something else I want to ask you to do after that, Prof, if you will.
That question, actually, to do it justice, would probably take me about 2 hours to answer. Let me just try and give you an abbreviated one. What we tend to keep doing is we keep attacking the symptoms of crime. So we keep thinking we've got a problem with narcotics, we must try to intercept narcotics trafficking. We've got an issue with illegal weapons, we've got to try and intercept the weapons. Of course, we are always going to need to do a certain amount of that, but in some ways the more fundamental question is to ask whether we've ever really understood the issue with narcotics, why people want to consume narcotics, why some are legal, why some are illegal. There was a time when narcotics were treated as a medical problem and not as a policing problem. So there are actually different approaches that we should be looking at and considering whether we really made the right decision here. There was a time when the United States, for a period of 18 months, decided to make alcohol illegal. And this was, of course, what happened was across the border in Canada, alcohol was legal. So you developed this huge industry in bootlegging or trafficking. People shipped alcohol from Canada down into the United States. What this did was it made a bunch of street corner hustlers into very powerful criminal organizations. This is how the mafia came to power. So after 18 months, the US said, well, okay, this isn't working. Let's try a different approach. And then what happened was, starting in about the 50s and 60s, we made the same decision. With regard to other narcotics, we made them illegal. Now, of course, what we've done is we've created this huge market in the United States, this huge industry, mainly based in Mexico now, supplying that market. And yet again, we have made a bunch of street corner hustlers into globally powerful criminal organizations. And yet we have not done one damn thing to reduce the total consumption of narcotics. So this approach clearly isn't working. And what we need to do, at least from time to time, is to ask ourselves, what is it we're trying to achieve here? And is this the most effective way to try to achieve it? Similarly, if you're talking about trafficking guns, you have to start to look at the reasons why you have these young men growing up in this country who think that what they need to do is find $300,000 and buy an AK. You know, seriously, we're not at war with anybody. Who are they at war with? The guys on the other side of the street, who then also think that they need to find $300,000 to buy an AK. Yeah, we need to actually start to address the psychological and social issues that also drive violence. Yes, we have to get the guns out of the equation, but you also have to spend a little bit of time analyzing the problem and think, what is driving this? Where did this come from? Where is it going? And where are our possible intervention points? So that approach, I think, can maybe help us to resolve some of our problems.
Thank you so very much, Prof. Prof, this final segment seeks to summarize your experience in sustainable development, with particular focus on crime strategies and economic development policy. What would you say were the most effective strategies devised and implemented by any country or locale? What advice would you give to national leaders who may be overwhelmed by repeatedly implementing crime strategies and economic development plans, but they are finding that they're not yielding significant results?
Well, Colette, we can look around the world and we can see examples of successful strategies. I mentioned earlier the example of Colombia, which broke the power of organized crime, reduced the numbers involved in criminal activity by about 50% and boosted their growth rate by nearly 400% in just 6 years. I talked about the example of the favelas in Rio de Janeiro. What I didn't say was that in the favelas in study, the homicide rate came down from about 80 per 100,000 to basically zero. So, and we've seen examples in the city of Glasgow in the UK, where a particular initiative reduced the level of violent crime in the city by about 50%. We've seen examples in the city of Boston in the US, where they achieved an even greater reduction in violent crime in a similarly short period. It's not that we don't have a short, there are models of success. We have never yet tried to implement one of those models in Jamaica. The strategy that's being pursued with the ZOSAs and the SOEs is what's called a clear, hold and build strategy. In clear, you dislodge the bad guys. In hold, you basically make it clear, you establish a presence that the bad guys can't just come back. But the crucial part is the build phase. That's when you have to fix the roads, fix the clinics, fix the street lights, fix the schools, and you have to do all of the social programs that I was talking about earlier. because you have to win the hearts and minds. You have to turn around the whole community and give them hope that a better life, a decent life, can be had. But that's the part we didn't do. So there are 6 models of success, and then for some reason we don't follow those strategies. We keep doing bits of it, but it's like, you know, you take your car to the mechanic with 4 major problems and you get one of them fixed. You know, you got a flat tire, flat battery, and the transmission's busted, and you just, well, all I can afford to do is change the tire. You can't actually expect the car to be, you know, you to be able to drive out afterwards. We've got a number of problems, and we really have to have a program, a comprehensive program, to fix all of them. And we never seem to do that. We keep thinking we're making progress by just trying to fix this one bit in a very isolated and disconnected manner. And of course, we never succeed. And then we just think, oh, you know, what do? Find a new commissioner of police. But until we actually change the approach, that nobody's going to go into that office with a magic wand to fix all of our problems. So what I would hope, Colette, is that one day we can actually have a slightly more systematic approach to thinking about our problems, figuring out what we're trying to do, figuring out what our options are, and then actually putting through an implementation plan. And that is really the essence of the strategic planning approach that I use in my work. And of course, I also teach at the university.
Wonderful. Thank you, Prof. Thank you so much for this very insightful, in-depth interview. I hope that the politicians, as well as the civil servants and ordinary citizens, will take the time to absorb what you have shared and to begin to make the change, because if it is to be, it is up to me, it is up to you, it's up to all of us. Professor Clayton, we thank you for accepting this invitation to be interviewed on Conversations with Colette. We thank you for adopting our beautiful island home and contributing so significantly to Jamaica's development. We know you had many choices, but you chose to invest in Jamaica and its people, and for that, we are grateful. We look forward to learning more from you and sharing your knowledge with our viewers locally and globally. I want to thank you for being an awesome research supervisor for me. I'd like the world to know now that you are the person who coached me up to and to the conclusion of defending my thesis on the role of good governance in managing public debt. I'm eternally grateful to you, Prof, and for the many, many others that you have coached. I recall in our sessions, in our cohort sessions, many persons who were being supervised from other faculties that had nothing to do with the Sustainable Development faculty would come over to your session because of how concerned you were and how wise and how much expertise you had to share with us, and for that we are extremely grateful. At this juncture, may I say, God bless you, Professor Clayton. God bless your family. God bless our viewers and the areas, countries, regions, provinces, and communities they call home. We invite them all to view, subscribe, like, share, and influence their own leaders to make a difference as it relates to reducing crime and corruption in their locale. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you very much, Colette. Thank you.